I love cello so much. That was Reinaud Ford. Over in the UK, some composer friends of mine introduced him to me. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. If I knew that I could have written and heard cello parts like that when I first started working on Moss 2, I'm not sure I could have controlled myself, because his playing and his intonation and his vibrato is just exactly what I heard in my head. It generates the emotional response that I've always heard with beautiful, amazing cello playing. What amazes me the most about Ren is his ability to just take a really incredibly lame MIDI file that I sent him with the worst virtual instrument performance ever, just to like get across the idea. And he'll send me, sometimes sends 2 takes, but most of the time, 1 take. And 1 take is all I need. I don't do any pitch correction, I don't do any time correction. All I do is some EQ and a little bit of reverb, which we'll get to in a minute, but that's it. What you hear in his performance is exactly what he recorded, and I'm just so over the moon and so excited. So here's some details on the very little bit that I had to do to get Ren to sit in the mix with everybody else. Here's the cello part I got from Ren, a dual mono file, and this is what it sounds like completely dry. Gorgeous tone. I love his playing. I love his instrument. Now, unfortunately, I don't have an ability to recreate what I did here because EC means EQ'd and compressed with the outboard gear. But I can tell you that I ran it through some of my 500 series gear. I've got a Serpent Audio Chimera. It's like an opto compressor that's basically an LA3A. And if you look at these 2 waveforms from up here to down here, it wasn't very compressed. It looks like I was barely kissing the compressor at all. And what I was really going for was the EQ, which was a 550B API 4-band EQ. So as a quick reminder, here's what it sounded like before. And here's after running through the outboard. Smoothed it out a little more top end, a little less low end. Now, Ren does a lot of playing up in that upper register of the cello, so I needed it to be bright enough to cut through, but also needed to have some reverb on it to really put it in the space. And this is the final printed version where I added some more of my 480L favorite lexicon, and then a little bit of top end boost from this Neve EQ after the reverb. You'll notice that the previous EC track was panned to the right, and the reverb on the final version kind of helps pull it back to center a little bit, but it also gives it more of a stage presence. So let's listen to it with all the other live instruments and see how it sits on that stage. Shout out to the low piano in octaves, emphasizing the low end, my favorite thing to do now that I've got a real piano to do it with. One of the first musicians I brought on board for Moss Book 2 was Tom Strahle, and I can't help but smile when I say his name, because this dude is like the magical fairy dust on top of anything that I send to him. The beauty of guitar is, yes, you can play lead lines, and yes, Tom can read MIDI parts and charts and everything else, but what I love about guitar is sort of the improvisational nature of it, and how I will send him melody lines, which he plays perfectly. But I'll also send him chords, and he does strumming and arpeggios and all kinds of really great things that, as a very, very, very limited guitarist, I would never be able to do. I had so much fun on our first video conference where Tom was pulling guitars out from everywhere and playing a bunch of different things. I knew I wanted a very specific sound for guitars, but I didn't know what that sound was going to be. I think we narrowed it down from like the 25 that he showed me to maybe 10, and ultimately I ended up picking 2. A bouzouki, 2 different kinds, which we'll get into in a minute, and a lute. They're very, very different sounds, but they complement each other really, really well. And I've learned over the years that a lot of times simple is better. Having 3 or 4 guitar parts doing 3 or 4 different things might not be the best thing in the world if there's a lot of other things going on in your mix. However, having 3 or 4 guitars play the exact same thing, either in octaves or in unison, can sometimes be super, super magical. Okay, quick overview of our guitars here. Here's the Irish bouzouki. Here's the Greek bouzouki. And here's the lute. With this many great performances of the same melody, what should you do? I'll tell you exactly what you should do. You should do this. Because why not? Hard left, hard right, and centered. And again, you'll probably notice a theme here. The recordings were so good that I didn't actually have to do a whole lot with these. Some low cut, a little bit of cut in the highs, a little bit of compression, and soothe too, which a lot of times I think this is the default setting for soothe. Maybe it's straight up, but all I do is just push it and let it do its thing. As opposed to... So you're really getting those high-end frequencies are getting tamed, and the overall dynamics are also being controlled. I added some Bricasti reverb to the 3 of them. And they kind of came alive. Now the Bricasti, for that sort of a quote-unquote in-the-room sound, I end up almost always using Studio B FAR in the room setting on the Bricastis. And this is the same setting that they have on all the emulators as well, like Seventh Heaven. That's close, and that's FAR. Those are the 2 for room sounds that I use all the time. So here's the final guitars with all their effects printed to them. And here's how they sit in the mix. We could be technical all day long talking about microphones and EQs and compression curves and things, but really it's about the emotional response of a performance. The performance being the key word here. If I'm given the choice between a perfectly recorded sampled cello versus an imperfectly recorded live cello, I think emotionally I'm going to be drawn to the live cello every single time. And when I say imperfectly recorded, I mean using your iPhone to record something. It's not about the gear, it's about how you use the gear, and more importantly, it's about the source that you're recording, at least to me.